All right, boys and girls, I believe it is 7 o'clock on the dot. So, thank y'all for showing up again. I appreciate that. I haven't run anybody off yet, so that's a good thing. So we're grateful that you're here tonight and that you are serious about studying God's Word. I know there's 100 other places you could be, and so we all appreciate that you're dedicated to a study of God's Word. So if we're going to begin with a word of prayer, Brother Jim's going to lead us in prayer, and then we'll get started in our class.
Our Father in heaven, we're so grateful today that we are privileged to bow before the great I am. Raise our voice in the praise and thanksgiving for your abundant blessings upon us day after day in our lives. Thank you for this day, Lord Father, for this opportunity to come together with fellow Christians to study your word. As we bless from Mark as he teaches us, may our hearts and minds be open. Let us always rejoice in our Lord Father, we pray always, for all of this that fully completed, and with the plan you will. Forgive us, O God, where we fail, lift us up each day, all of us better serve tonight. We pray in Jesus' name.
Amen. All right, so our goal tonight is to get through chapters 5 and 6, and I do believe I already gave you the questions, right, for those, so you already have those, so those should be due next week, assuming we get through this, and we should tonight, and so that'll still be slightly behind, but that'll get us almost on track. So we left off last time. We finished up with a little bit of historical background. As we get into chapter 5, we noticed that if you went chronologically, it'd actually go to, from 4, you'd go to chapter 7, then 8, and then come, it's almost like Daniel goes back in time to 5 and 6, okay? So in chapter 5, which is where we are in the first 4 verses, we see Belshazzar talks about him, the king. He was the co-ruler along with his father, Nabonidus. Okay, Nabonidus traveled a lot. He was away a lot, and so Belshazzar apparently had a lot of authority to run the kingdom while his father was away for these long periods of time. Now, we do want to clear something up. In verse 2, it talks about, it says, which his father Nebuchadnezzar had taken out of the temple. Okay, and so you read that and you think, oh, so this is Nebuchadnezzar's son. Well, actually, that's not the case. He is Nebuchadnezzar's grandson. Okay, and so the wording in the Bible, the Hebrew word that's translated here is father. It can also mean grandfather. And by the historical record, that's what it means, because he is Belshazzar was Nebuchadnezzar's grandson. Okay, so I want to clear that up, make sure we understand that's who he was. Now, in chapter 5, and hopefully you all have done your homework and read ahead, we see that Belshazzar, he is throwing a drunken party. How many people are there? Yeah, a whole bunch of them, right? Says before the 1,000, right? There's at least 1,000 people, so this is a big party. Okay, and they're getting drunk, and they're having a good time, and they are drinking out of the vessels stolen from where? Solomon's temple, right? That's what they're using. And so they're with this, they're drinking out of these vessels that were taken from the temple, and in these things they're doing, they are praising with these vessels false gods. So is that, you think that's a little bit disrespectful to Jehovah? A little bit, right? And this is what they're doing, and they're going to pay dearly for this, okay? So they're disrespecting, praising these false gods, but as we're going to see in this chapter, what this means is while they're having this party, they're going to be too drunk to stop the invasion that's going to happen this very night. Okay, so it's not going to take long for Belshazzar to suffer the penalty of what he's doing here. Now, they must have felt very, very secure in where they lived, and when I tell you this, you can imagine why, because most of us probably not in our time period because of the technology, but if we lived back then, before airplanes and all those kind of things, they must have felt pretty invincible from invasion from where they were. Okay, the city of Babylon, of course, it's located on the Euphrates River. It's about roughly about 50 miles south of modern-day Baghdad, which is in what country? I didn't know it was going to be a geography quiz tonight. He has stumped the crowd. Nobody, where's Baghdad? Iraq, the modern country of Iraq. Okay, y'all need to study your geography. Okay, that's where it's located. And, of course, it was built by Nebuchadnezzar, and he had, you got to give him some credit. Of course, God gave him the power and authority to do what he did. But he had built quite a magnificent city, and that's one of the things that had led to Nebuchadnezzar's pride. And remember, God's going to bring him down for that. Okay, and he's got to go out and live with the animals for a while. And so we talked, I think we mentioned last week, the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, one of the 7 ancient wonders of the world that Nebuchadnezzar had built for his wife. So this was an impressive city. Now, Herodotus, who was a Greek historian, so the Bible doesn't tell us this, but we get this from secular history. According to him, so to give you some idea about why they would think this city was impregnable, again with the technology of the day, the walls around, most of the cities back then had walls around them. Well, the walls around this one were 87 feet thick. 87 feet thick. Now, if you think that's impressive, they were 300 feet high. That requires a pretty good scale job there, Reggie, to get up that thing. 300 feet, how big is that? 300 feet. Compare that to a sports thing, what? That's a football field from goal line to goal line, stacked on in. That's what, like a 10-story building or something? I don't know. That's tall, and especially, again, back then before they had planes and drones and all the stuff that we have now. So they would have felt very secure. 300 feet tall, 87 feet thick. Nobody's getting in here, or so they thought. Right? And so they're partying and they're having a good time, feeling that, they're pretty invincible. All right, so let's go to verses 5 through 9. And so while they're having this party, using the vessels from God's temple, the king looks over and he sees on one of the walls in the banquet hall there, he sees a partial hand, like fingers from a hand, and that hand is writing something on the wall. Okay? And so he sees this. He doesn't, of course, know what it is. What it is, the hand of God, basically, figuratively speaking. But he watches this hand. It's writing these words on the wall, and it tells us here in Daniel that it scared him so bad that he was visibly shaking. It says his knees were knocking together. So he's terrified. He's watching this kind of phantom hand write something on the wall. And so, what do you think, if you were in his shoes, you see this and there's words written on the wall, what would you do? You want to know what it means, right? So, who do you call? It's not the Ghostbusters. Who do you call? Who do you think he calls? He should have called Daniel, but he does. Who's he call? Yeah, the astrologers, the magicians, He calls these guys, and that didn't work out too well for his grandfather. But he does the same thing. And so he calls them in. I want you boys to read what's on this wall and interpret. Tell me what it says and what it means. Right? And guess what? They don't have a clue. They can't read it, so they certainly can't interpret it. They can't even read the words. They don't know what it's saying. And he had promised them a great reward if they could tell him what it said. So he's going to give them the best clothing, royal clothing. He says they're going to have gold chains they can hang around their neck. They can tell him what it means. And he says, I'm going to put you, whoever tells me what that means, you're going to be third in command in this kingdom. Okay? Because as we said, we looked at, his father is often away, but technically Nebuchadnezzar would be first in the kingdom, and then Belshazzar would be second. And so he's saying, I'm going to put, whoever tells me that, you'll be right below me. So, pretty big deal. You get the royal clothes, you get the gold chains, and you'll be right below me in authority in the kingdom. Doesn't do them much good, though, because they can't read it. They don't know what it means. Okay? Now, remember, when Nebuchadnezzar, he offered a lot of rewards for those guys, but he also did something else. If you get this right, I'll reward you, and if you don't, yeah, I'm going to kill you, right? There's no record of Belshazzar threatening them. Now, he may have, I would think he probably did, I don't know. But there's no record of it here. It doesn't mention any kind of a threat if they don't do it. It just talks about they'll be rewarded if they're able to do it, but they can't. Okay? So, about this time, the queen is summoned in, so she comes in. And she remembered, or she knew, what Daniel had done for Nebuchadnezzar. And he'd had a couple of dreams, and Daniel was the only one that could interpret it and tell him what happened. So she suggests to her husband, Belshazzar the king, hey, why don't you call this guy Daniel? I bet he can do it. He did it for your grandfather. He'd be the guy you want to talk to. Okay? So she tells her husband to do that, and so Daniel, he agrees, and so Daniel is brought in. And the king tells Daniel, even at that point, oh yeah, I've heard of you. You're one of the Jewish captives, and I've heard something about you, and I know that you do have some kind of ability to interpret dreams and visions. Okay? Now, like Nebuchadnezzar, he tells Daniel, he says, the spirit of the gods is with you. So notice this little g, and what's on the end of it? S, right? What does that mean? Plural, right? So, like his grandfather, he's still saying, well, your God is just one God among many. He doesn't get it either. But he's like, well, I believe you do have the power of one of the gods, but he's a God among many. Okay, so he doesn't understand the one true God concept either. Now remember, when Daniel was first taken, we talked about, the Bible doesn't say exactly how old he was, but does anybody remember we mentioned about how old he probably was? Yeah, between 15 to 20, somewhere in there. Okay, now this is toward the end of the captivity, which lasted how long? 70 years. We're not quite to the end, but we're very close to the end at this point. So Daniel must be about 85, 90 years old, somewhere in that neighborhood at this point when he does this. Okay, and so the king offers Daniel all the same rewards he offered the other guys. If you can tell me you'll have the finest clothes, you'll have the gold chain, and I'll make you third in the kingdom, if you can tell me what this means. Okay, so verses 17 through 24. So what do you think Daniel would say, if he said anything, what would he say about the king's reward? Yeah, I don't want, you can keep your reward, you can give it to somebody else, I don't care. But he said, but I'll tell you what it means. But you don't have to bribe me, you don't have to give me anything, I'll tell you what it means. Okay? Because, again, he's going to give God the glory. God will allow me to tell you what this means. But he's not interested in the reward. So at this point, Daniel takes this opportunity before he interprets the writing on the wall. He starts to, takes a lot of courage to do this. He starts to kind of let Belshazzar have it. Okay? He's going to kind of chastise him somewhat, and he tells him that, you remember your grandfather, God had allowed your grandfather Nebuchadnezzar to have all this power. He got that from God, and then Daniel reminds him, but if you'll remember, Nebuchadnezzar's pride, because of that, God brought him down. He was cast out. He had to live with he lived like an animal for a period of time. And then he was allowed to come back. God let him come back, but only when what? Yeah, he acknowledged God. Right, he learned his lesson. And he acknowledged, I get my power from God. It didn't come from me. I get it from him. So Daniel reminds Belshazzar of all that. He kind of goes back through that and reminds him, hey, this is what your grandfather went through. So he had pride. He glorified himself rather than giving God the glory. Once he was willing to give God the glory, then God gave him his kingdom back. Okay? When he acknowledged that God was the ruler of all men, not Nebuchadnezzar. So he starts off with that, kind of, this is what your grandfather did wrong. Now, he's going to hammer Belshazzar himself. Okay? And so Daniel tells him, so you know all this stuff that I just told you, all this stuff I just reminded you of, you knew that already. You knew what happened to Nebuchadnezzar. You knew the whole story. And yet, what are you doing? Same thing. Right? You're doing the same thing. You, from all the stuff that happened to your grandfather, you, Belshazzar, what did you learn from it? Zero. You didn't learn a thing. At least your grandfather, at least he learned his lesson. You haven't learned a thing. And he went through all that, hopefully, so you could learn something, and you didn't. So it takes a lot of guts kind of for him to just stand there and tell the king in front of, again, all these people. This is, you're making the same mistakes. Okay? So what exactly had Belshazzar done? Well, he's guilty of pride, just like Nebuchadnezzar was. He was not humble at all. In fact, he had rebelled against God by doing what? What was he doing right here? He's using the vessels from the temple and getting drunk with them. Yeah, he's kind of spitting in God's face. Yeah. So yeah, you've not humbled yourself. In fact, you're rebelling against the one true God. And then he talks about the holy vessels, right? You've used them to get drunk. So not only are you disrespecting God, but you're also sinning in other ways. You're engaged in drunkenness, which God forbids. And then what else were they doing? Well, they were, in the midst of this party, they were praising false gods. They were guilty of idolatry. Okay? Gods that Daniel points out, these gods that you're celebrating, where'd they come from? You made them. You handcrafted these idols. Why do you need to build a god? I mean, shouldn't God take care of himself? You got to build one. You got to dust it off, take care of it. You know, God doesn't need that. So you guys created these gods. They cannot see. They cannot hear. They cannot act to help. They can't do a thing to help you. You can praise them and pray to them all day long. They're not going to help you because they're incapable of helping you because they don't exist. Right? And he said, you know what? They're not even aware that you are worshiping them. Talk about a colossal waste of time. And then also he says, of course, you don't glorify God in anything you do. You take all the credit for yourself. It says, you know, God gives you everything. Gives you every breath you take. Do you acknowledge him? No. You don't make any real attempt or effort to glorify God. And so Daniel tells him, after going through all this, he said, so this writing on the wall here, this came from God. You know, the God you don't respect. That's where this came from. So what you saw really, again, symbolically, figuratively, because no man's ever really seen God, but you saw the hand of God writing these words on the wall. The God that you disrespect. And so then we get to verses 25 through 29, and Daniel is going to read the words on the wall, and he's going to tell him what it means. Okay? So mene, M-E-N-E, that basically means, Belshazzar, your time is up. Okay? It's midnight, Cinderella. Time's up. God has had enough of your disrespect and all the horrible things that you've done, and so your kingdom is about to come to an end. That's what Daniel reads the words, says that's what that means. Why is my kingdom going to come to an end? Well, Tekel, God is very displeased with your actions. That's why he's going to issue this judgment against you. God hates what you're doing, how you're behaving. And he's not going to put up with it any longer. God's been long-suffering with you. He's been merciful to you, but time's up. Okay, so he's not happy at all with the way you've conducted yourself. And then Perez is God's judgment is going to come down on you, and the judgment is that your kingdom is going to come to an end because it's going to, remember, this is still the Babylonians. You are going to be conquered specifically by who? The Medo-Persians, right. Okay, so you are going to be conquered. Your kingdom is going to be taken over by the Medo-Persians. Okay, and it says in verse 28, the Medes and the Persians, or the Medo-Persian Empire. Now remember, both Jeremiah and Daniel had already prophesied that this would happen. But, do what? Jeremiah and Daniel had both prophesied that there would come a day when this would happen. Well, today's the day. Okay? So it's no longer somewhere off in the future. This is it. But not sure that Belshazzar really understands that. So we said Daniel doesn't want the rewards, but the king wants to give it to him. So he says, no, I said I'm going to make you third in the kingdom, so I'm going to make you third in the kingdom. That's what I said I would do, and I'm going to do it. So what does that indicate? No, I'm going to make you third in the kingdom. What? Did the king really comprehend what Daniel just told him? Obviously not, right? Maybe due to being drunk, or, I just wonder if Daniel said to him, did you hear what I just said? I'm going to be third in what kingdom? Here in a couple hours, your kingdom's not going to be here. Right? Did you understand what I said? Third in control of what? Nothing. Yeah, your kingdom's going down. So what Daniel received may be one of the briefest promotions in history. He gets to number 3 for, a couple hours. Right? And then there's not going to be a 1 or a 2 or a 3 because that kingdom's going to be gone. So yeah, it seems like Belshazzar, he doesn't really comprehend what Daniel has told him. Now, I say it's a brief promotion, but because the Babylonians aren't going to be there anymore, but the Medo-Persians are going to come in, what's going to happen to Daniel under the Medo-Persians? Just in general. Is he going to do well or not? He's still going to do well, right? So God is still going to continue to bless him. He is going to be elevated to a very high position under the Medes and Persians as well. So don't worry about Daniel. He's going to be fine. Okay? But it's just kind of almost comical that I'm going to make you third. It's not going to be here. What are you talking about? And Daniel, of course, he didn't care anything about that anyway, unless it could serve God in some capacity. All right, then we see in the last couple of verses in chapter 5, in that night was Belshazzar, the king of the Chaldeans, slain. And Darius the Median took the kingdom, being about 62, or about 62 years old. Okay, so that very night, that same night, Belshazzar's kingdom is going to fall. So I'm pretty sure, it's pretty clear he didn't really understand that, but that's what's going to happen. And unlike Nebuchadnezzar, Belshazzar gets it worse in a couple of ways. Number one, is he going to get his kingdom back? Nope. And number two, he's dead. Nebuchadnezzar, God didn't kill him, right? But Belshazzar, he's going to be executed for all the evil things he's done. So again, an example of the Medo-Persians, are they faithful followers of God? No. They're just as idolatrous and wicked, but again, God's going to use them for his purposes. Just like he used Nebuchadnezzar, he's also going to use Darius and Cyrus as well. So, same kind of thing. Okay, now, Cyrus was the Medo-Persian king. And so apparently, Darius was one of his top officials. Okay, and so Cyrus is going to give Darius authority in this area that they took from the Babylonians, because he's got a large empire as well. Okay? Mind your way, Beth. Now, the Medo-Persians seemingly entered Babylon, this impregnable city, without any kind of a fight whatsoever. Okay? So that's kind of interesting, because everybody was drunk, so nobody was really fit to offer up any kind of defense or fight. And so they seemed like they got to the palace really without any kind of fight, and there they killed the king, Belshazzar. And what about Nabonidus, his father? I mean, what about him? He was the king too. Well, they're going to capture him somewhere else. They'll get him too. What? Who? Nabonidus? Yes. Nabonidus. I should have put it up there. Nabonidus. Nabonidus. So could there be a lesson in here for us today, the United States today? Afraid so, right? We're the major superpower, but for how long? We're still relatively young as a country, because we're getting ready to celebrate our 250th birthday next year, Lord willing. So that's fairly young. A lot of countries have been around for thousands of years, but how long are we going to last? Have we turned away from God? A lot of us have. There are a lot of wicked people in our government. This country, and they'll even, some of these people try to tell us, I don't want to go too far down this rabbit hole, get me started on this, I'll be going for a long time, but this country was founded on the Bible and on Christian principles. It doesn't mean they were perfect Christian men, that's not what I'm saying. But they did believe in the Bible, they believed in Jesus, or almost all of them did, and they wanted the country, they understood, we've got to be a moral country or it's not going to work. We were founded on those principles. There are people today that will tell you that's a lie and that's not true. Wow, the people that found this, they never wanted to have anything to do with God. No, that's the lie. But we have fallen so far away from that. Has any nation in the world ever been blessed more than this one? It's hard for me to think of one, right? And so it's very tragic and sad, because we've become prideful. We've turned, not you and me obviously, because we're here trying to do the right thing, but overall our society, I don't even want to list all the wicked things that are happening now that are sanctioned by a lot of people in our society and a lot of people in our government. How long is God going to be patient with us? I don't know. Okay? But we do know from all these things that God, He is loving, He is merciful, He's long-suffering, but His patience does have limits. And sooner or later it runs out. So if we don't turn back to God, we may be in a lot of trouble. So I think there's a lot of good lessons for us to learn. People say, well, we're wasting our time studying the Old Testament. I don't think so at all. And God wants us to learn these lessons from the Old Testament. All right, so let's take a look at chapter 6. So as we said, the Babylonian Empire falls that night. Darius, as we said, is one of Cyrus's ministers. And so apparently he's put in charge of this area that they conquered from the Babylonians. And so Darius also, like Nebuchadnezzar had done, he's going to give Daniel a high position in his government because God's going to continue to bless Daniel because he's doing the right thing. Daniel had proven he was a man of character. He had proven his ability, right? And God was with him. And so God wants him to continue to serve in this way. So he had served in the Babylonian government. God wants him to continue to serve in the Medo-Persian government. Now again, who is it? What prophet was it with the common people, the captives? Ezekiel. Yeah, he's working with them. Daniel's job is to work with the government, influence them however he can. Okay? Now God often does this. So a couple of examples. Think about what happened to Joseph. Was he elevated in a foreign government? The Egyptian government, second only to Pharaoh. Right? So he did that. Later on, past what we're talking about, later on in the Medo-Persian Empire, you're going to see Esther elevated to a very influential position. So, God does that sort of thing even with foreign governments, even with wicked governments, where God and his people can have some influence. So Darius comes in, and as you can imagine with the new empire, they want to do things their way, and they want to reorganize, right? And so he's going to set up a government. He's got 120 princes in charge of these, different provinces. And then over the 120 princes, he's got 3 what he calls presidents. 120 princes, 3 presidents. Daniel will be given one of these 3 presidents' jobs. Okay? And not only that, but the king makes it clear that Daniel is really over the other 2. So they're not all 3 presidents equal. Really, Daniel, he only really answers to Darius, who only answers to Cyrus. So again, where does that put Daniel? So he did get that promotion after all. He just got it from a different person, right? So he is going to be third in this new kingdom. Okay? Well, all is not well. These other 2 presidents and these princes, but especially the other 2 presidents, they're not happy at all about being placed beneath a foreigner who's a captive. So, whoa, how did this guy get? He's not even one of us, and he's a captive, he's a prisoner. How does he get such a great job? So they're very jealous about how Daniel is prospering. Again, he's prospering because God is with him. So these other government officials, they start looking for a way to bring Daniel down. Okay? Well, this guy, he's pretty uppity, man. He thinks he's the stuff. We got to knock him down a few notches. In fact, what they'd really like to do is what? Let's just kill him. That'd be good. That'd get him out of the way. Yeah, that'd do it. Right? So that's what they'd really like to do. So they want to bring him down, right? Well, there's only one little problem with their plan. They can't find anything wrong with Daniel. He doesn't break any laws. He's been a great servant to Darius. As we're going to see, and they would have known this, Darius loves Daniel, has a lot of respect for Daniel, because Daniel has served him well. He's done a good job. And remember, that's what was prophesied years and years and years ago. When you go into Babylon and Medo-Persia, if you serve them, you'll do well. So Daniel's doing what he's supposed to do. So they know this. So they can't find anything wrong. He's not doing anything that we could get him on. But of course, they're not going to give up. Right? And so Daniel is the kind of man that God calls blameless. And you see that about some people in the Bible, not very many, but you see that. One of the places that we see that is in 1 Timothy 3, 2 and 10. We're not going to go read that, but again, it's talking about elders and deacons. Right? In verse 2 it says, elders, a bishop then must be blameless. And then verse 10, it talks about the office of a deacon being found blameless. Daniel was a man who was blameless. So does that mean sinless? Does that mean perfect? No. How do we know it doesn't mean that? The Bible says all men are sinners. That includes elders and deacons, right? So we're all flawed human beings, right? So what does it mean then to be blameless? It means you're not somebody who's a habitual sinner, right? You are somebody who is doing your absolute best to serve God. Yes, every now and then you're going to stumble. You're going to sin occasionally, but it's going to be few and far in between. You're striving to live for God on a daily basis. That's what that means. Where other people can't point out I can't believe that guy's a deacon. You know all the stuff that kind of thing, right? So Daniel is someone who's blameless. And these guys, they can't find any fault with him. Okay? So, maybe they should just pack up and go home. You think they'll do that? No, they're not going to do that. So, in spite of living for God, in fact, I would say because he's living for God, Daniel's going to face a lot of persecution, including what we're going to read about in this chapter. Now, remember in the Sermon on the Mount, in Matthew 5, remember Jesus said that we'll face the same thing. Right? If we stand for Christ, are we going to be persecuted? Yeah. Even though we're trying to do the right thing. We're going to be persecuted. We just talked about what a wicked world we live in. Right? So there's a lot of people that don't appreciate those who stand up for Christ. And Jesus said, blessed are ye when men shall revile you and persecute you and say all manner of evil against you falsely for my sake. Okay, so they're doing it because you are standing up for me. That's why they're doing it. And Jesus is praising those people, says you will be blessed if you take that persecution. Well, Daniel, he's going to face that persecution and he's going to take that persecution. So these guys, again, they can't find anything wrong with him, so they put their heads together, and how are we going to get this guy? And so they finally figure out that the only way that they can get Daniel, which is what they're trying to do, it'll have to be something in relation to God's law. Because they understand, they can see how faithful Daniel is to God. So that's how if we're going to get him, we got to get him somehow with him trying to follow God and somehow convince the king that that's against him. That's the only way we're going to be able to pull this off. Okay? So they're going to plot against him, and they're going to use Darius, unwittingly, I will add, but they're going to use Darius to trap Daniel, to set him up. Okay? And so they go to Darius and they say, look, you ought to pass a law that says that for 30 days, nobody can pray to anyone, any man or any god, except you. You're the only one that they can pray to for 30 days. We think that'd be a good thing, king. You should do that because you're great. They're going to butter him up and tell him he's a great king and all that stuff. And so you should pass that law. And this law needs to have some teeth in it. Right? There's got to be a penalty. What if somebody doesn't obey the law? What if somebody disrespects you? Well, you need to put in there that they'll be thrown to the lions. Okay? So they can't pray to any god or any man except you, and then if they do, they'll be thrown to the lions. Okay? And so the king agrees, says, yeah, that sounds like a good idea, and so he signs this decree and makes it a law. Because he has no idea that Daniel is the target of this law. They don't share that part yet, not yet. So he signs that into law. Now, one of the weird things about the Medo-Persian Empire is that once a king passed a law, you couldn't repeal it. Okay? You couldn't undo the law. You couldn't say, well, that was a bad law, let's get rid of it. You couldn't do it. It was permanent. Well, those other presidents, they knew that too, right? So, boy, if we can just get the king to do this, there's no way to back out of it, even if he wanted, because they know he really likes Daniel. But even the king won't be able to back out of it. So if we get him to do it. So they get him to do it, and he signs it. Because they figured if he knew that Daniel was the target of this, he'd never sign it. So that they don't tell him that part. Okay? So they don't tell him until after he signs it, knowing that he can't take it back. But after he signs it, then they're going to tell him that, oh, by the way, Daniel is breaking this law. Okay? So let's go to the next section, verses 10 through 17. So Daniel, of course, being high placed in the government, did he know about this law? Yeah, he knew. Right? Now look at verse 10 there in chapter 6. Now when Daniel knew that the writing was signed, he knew it's a done deal. He went to his house, and his windows being open in his chamber toward Jerusalem, he kneeled upon his knees 3 times a day and prayed and gave thanks before his God as he did aforetime. So in other words, what does that mean as he did aforetime? Yeah, before the law, after the law. Did that law make any difference to Daniel? Not a bit. Why? He's going to serve God regardless, right? That law didn't have any effect on his spiritual life, right? And notice, he's not trying to hide anything. He's got his window open. And it was kind of a custom. It wasn't a commandment, but it was a custom of the Jews at the time. A lot of times they would pray toward Jerusalem. You didn't have to do that. So he's doing that. But the thing is, he's got his windows open. So he's not down in the basement somewhere hiding under the bed. Well, I'm going to go pray real quietly. Maybe nobody will hear me. He's like, man, I'm doing what I've always done. I'm not going to change my behavior because this law has been passed, because I'm more loyal to God than I am to this government. Okay? So he's going to continue to obey God. Now, what about you and me? Do we need to do that? What if our government passed a law tomorrow that said you can't attend church anymore? You got to be an atheist. You can't believe in God anymore. What would we have to do? We'd have to defy it, right? And God says we are supposed to obey the laws of the land unless what? Unless they contradict His laws, right? So we are supposed to obey the government, but not if it goes against God, and that's what this law was doing. Okay, Acts 5:29 we've looked at before, right? We ought to obey God rather than men. Okay, so Daniel, he's going to do that. Okay, so those other guys, they expected that Daniel would do that, so they go and they spy on him, and they see him doing it, and they probably just about broke a leg trying to get to the king quick enough to tell him, hey, you know what we just saw? That fella Daniel, that Jew captive guy, yeah, he prays not once, not twice, 3 times a day. He's disobeying your law. He doesn't care anything about you, Darius. He hates your guts because he's disobeying this law. So they can't wait to tell the king about this. Because they figured, again, that Daniel he's going to continue to obey, and so we can trap him, and that's exactly what they did. Okay? So when they go in, now the interesting thing is they can't wait to tell the king, right? So they go in, but before they spring it on him, hey, you know what Daniel's doing? Before they do that, they remind him, you know that law, you passed a law, says this, and remember they got to go to the lion's den, and remember that you can't repeal that, like he needs reminding all that. They remind him of all that stuff because they know he's probably not going to be too happy about this. Right? So they remind him of all that before they tell him that Daniel's the one that broke it. Okay, they remind him, and then they tell him it's Daniel, and then they remember he's a Jewish captive, and he's got no respect for the king. Again, he's violating your law 3 times a day. Once would be bad, but he's doing it 3 times a day. So we see here an example of Daniel's devotion, right? He's not going to change his behavior. He's not going to change his actions toward God because this law has been passed. So Darius at this point realizes he's been snookered. But you know what? It says he's not mad at Daniel for breaking the law. Who's he mad at? Himself. I can't believe, I walked right into that one. Because he did. I mean, it was a brilliant plan. I mean, you know, and he walked right into it. So he's really mad at himself that he did this, that he had been tricked. And so we see that he anguished over this. I mean, he really anguished over this. Verse 14, he was sore displeased with himself, set his heart on Daniel to deliver him. And he labored till the going down of the sun. He's trying to rack his brains. How can I get Daniel out of this? There's got to be a loophole in here some. How can I? And he comes to the conclusion he can't. This is airtight. But he's really bothered by that, and he knows the law can't be repealed. So, verses 16 and 17, Darius realizes he's got no choice, and so he orders Daniel into the lion's den. Now, in verses 18 through 23, he's very upset. The king says he refuses to eat. He doesn't want any music played, which apparently he regularly had, and said he can't sleep. He's just tossing and turning all night because he's so beside himself about how all this has played out. Okay, now I want you to notice in verse 20. So the 19, the king rose early in the morning. He's got to see if Daniel made it, right? Because the king, something interesting is the king had told Daniel that when he went in there, he said, I'm hoping that your king or your God will save you. He can save you from the lion. So Darius believed enough in the real God that he knew he had the power to save Daniel or to take care of Daniel. So we get to verse 20. And when he came to the den, he cried with a lamentable voice. What does that mean? It means expressing grief. He's mournful. He's very worried. And so he calls out, wanting to know if Daniel survived the night. And so the king was holding out for a miracle, which he knew was possible. And so Daniel answers him. He praises the king. And he says that God shut the mouths of the lions. So again, he gives God all the credit. It wasn't right for my time to die, and God didn't let anything happen to me. The lions haven't touched me. And he says, why did this happen? He said, because God found me innocent. That's why Daniel hadn't done anything wrong. So Darius orders Daniel to be released. He was relieved about that, and it says not a scratch was found on him. The lions didn't touch him at all because of his faith in God. Now remember back in chapter 3, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and they put them in the fire, they got them out of the fire. What evidence was there? None. There was no evidence. They weren't burnt. Their clothes weren't burnt. They didn't even smell like fire. No evidence. It's like they'd never even been in there. Same thing with Daniel. Didn't have a scratch on him. Hadn't been hurt at all. Okay? All right, last section, verses 24 through 28. So the king is thrilled that Daniel survived it, that Daniel's God had delivered him and the lions hadn't hurt him. But now his joy quickly turns to anger. And this time it's not at himself. Who is it? All those boys who wanted me to kill Daniel. Let's bring them in here. So, you bamboozled me into passing that law because you had Daniel in mind the whole time. Let's see how you like it. So the king orders that they are to be thrown into the lion's den, and not just them, but their wives and children. You think he was mad? Oh, he was mad. He was livid that they had done this to him. And so the very same lions that didn't touch Daniel, what'd they do to them? So they broke all their bones. They ate them up. Ate them up. Proves that Daniel was saved by a miracle from God. There's nothing wrong with those lions, right? And so according to Josephus, and this is not inspired, it's not in the Bible, but he said that the conspirators had claimed that, well, the lions had been so well fed before you threw Daniel in. That's the only reason they didn't eat him. It wasn't because of God. They claimed that. And so Josephus said that when Darius did this, he ordered the lions to be well fed again before he threw all them in, to show them, oh, no, it was God that did that. They're going to be well fed, and they're still going to eat you boys, and that's what they did. Now, again, that's not inspired. That's according to Josephus, but it's plausible that it could have gone something like that. Okay, and remember again, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, the same fire that didn't kill them killed the guys that threw them in. Nothing wrong with that fire. It was hot enough, right? So this was just God. So then after this, to close us out, Darius passed a decree that commands, it says, everybody will tremble and respect before Daniel's God. The king calls Jehovah the living God. He says his kingdom is everlasting. He praises God as being all-powerful. Now, does that sound familiar? Didn't another king do that? Nebuchadnezzar said a lot of the same stuff. So Darius treated Daniel well. He had a lot of respect for him because Daniel had served Nebuchadnezzar and him. But it did not give Darius the right to force people to go against God's commands, which is what he tried to do by saying you can't pray to anybody, but Daniel wasn't going to do it. But no government has that right. All right, we're done. I know we went over a couple minutes. Thank you for giving me a couple minutes extra. So next week, Lord willing, we'll pick it up with chapter 7. And so your questions for chapters 5 and 6, those will be due next week. So we'll take a break.